Welcome, everyone. This is Coaching in Session. My name is Michael Rearden, and I will be your mindset coach today. And today we're going to be talking about parenting and how to do it, right? Because when we try to figure out if you are a parent, maybe you're a soon-to-be parent, or you know someone who's going to be a soon-to-be parent, you're like, oh my God, can I do this? Will everything going to be okay? And oftentimes it will be. Somehow we make it through. Think of it as if you have to go to work and maybe you're not feeling good, or maybe you are not confident in yourself that day. There could be many issues going on, but then you make it through somehow. I know when I was a kid, I would have a presentation or a report to do at school, and I would say, oh my God, I can't wait till this day is over. I don't know how I'm going to make it through. And sure enough, every single time I have this challenge or adversity, I make it through. And parenting can be a similar mindset, where we have a child and we're like, I want to give the child the world. Or maybe you go through just life in general, and it can be very difficult for you to juggle work, raising a child, being a parent. And then from there, you're trying to figure out, if you can't do it by yourself, what do you do? Sometimes you say, well, I can't be a parent today. Let me give it to my phone. Let me give it to my iPad. Let me give it to my TV. And so now children are being raised by technology devices. And I understand sometimes as a parent, you need a reprieve. But at the same time, the joys of parenting is more than just making sure your child is protected and safe. The most enjoyable things that I do with my children is that I get to run with them. I get to play with them. I get to read with them. And let me tell you how busy I am. I'm crazy busy. I just did a tweet a couple months ago, I guess at this point, where I was like, I can't believe how busy I am. This is crazy. You might be overwhelmed. You might be fatigued, tired. I mean, there's going to be so many different things. Anxiety can kick in, stress, right? Like all of these things are normal to a degree, or common. We have to look at, how are you looking at those little moments? And I love just the 5 minutes or 10 minutes that I get to run around with him. And if I'm leaving to go to a meeting or go to the office, I get to pick him up and I get to throw him on the bean bag and he's laughing. I take him on the trampoline and we go running, we go swimming on our off days. I mean, there's just these small pockets that I pay attention to. Whether you're struggling or if you're not struggling, we have to create that mindfulness for ourselves and to our child, because again, they have their own unique personality. They are going to be going through their own life circumstances, and we might not know how to navigate it all. I know for me, I was fortunate through my background in coaching children how to swim, teaching children in the classrooms. I am adept in, raising children. And just having one child or two child, like if I look at my family by myself compared to having 30 kids, this is a cakewalk. But not everyone is equipped with that. This is not to say that, if you're not me, you can't figure out parenthood. This is to say that you can learn it too. Today, I'm going to be bringing on a parenting coach, Danielle Linder, to be helping us understand that if you are struggling and you need some assistance, there is going to be resources for that. So let's take a look at that interview with Danielle and myself. Welcome, Danielle Linder, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks so much for coming on. Today, we're going to be talking about your work as a parenting coach. And I just love learning things about different professions, different coaches, and especially parenting, because parenting is not going to be a cookie cutter type of thing. It's not going to be a one size fit all. There's going to be unique situations, scenarios that a parent must understand and go through, especially if you have multiple children, because all of them have different personalities. So we're going to be learning all the tips and tricks today and getting into your work and how you help people. In your own words, can you tell the world who you are, what you do, and how you help?
Sure. I try and help parents by giving them a toolbox with strategies to make parenting more joyful, more peaceful, and less full of battles. And I work with primarily parents who have children 18 months through, let's say, first grade, second grade, mostly early childhood educator. So that's my wheelhouse. And I started a preschool 14 years ago. I've worked with hundreds of children and hundreds of parents, and every child's different, every parent's different. I just felt like a lot of parents feel like they're alone out there, that asking for help means that they failed. And it's so the contrary. Asking for help means that you want to do the best by your child and your family. And often having another opinion that's not invested in your family per se, like your mother-in-law, your father-in-law, your father, your mother, your brothers or sisters, where they have some stake in it, you often will get more of an honest opinion and hopefully get some good tools that you can use to make parenting fun.
Okay. So what type of opinions are you seeing when people come to you for help and assistance?
Well, a lot of times parents will say, my child is tantruming all the time. And my, let's just say, mother in law is blaming me, saying that I'm not tough enough on her. I'm not strict enough. I'm always giving in. And that's why she's tantruming all the time. And there's a lot of mom guilt that happens. And this can happen with dads too. And we say, okay, so I say, so first of all, we're going to put that away, because the tantruming is not because you're a bad parent. The tantruming is because of something else going on. So that's when we would start to try and dissect it. And let's talk about, so what are the things that set off the tantrum? What are the things that make your child upset? Does your child have any learning challenges? Sometimes a child has a learning challenge that we're unaware of. The frustration of perhaps not being able to communicate effectively what they need or want can cause them to melt down and have a tantrum. And sometimes it's things that are just happening in the house. You have a new baby, dad or mom is traveling a lot. There's now a co-parenting arrangement. Maybe there's been a divorce. I try and dissect it with them, whatever, and figure out what is at the root cause of the tantrum. Or maybe they're not feeling well. It's so many different things, but it's never because you're a bad parent. So I think that's the first thing I want parents to know.
I know you work with parents with children between 18 months and about 8 years old. What would you say is the most challenging years for new parents?
I would say it's the 3-year-old years, surprisingly, because everybody thinks it's the terrible twos, and it really isn't. Every year, I have parents come to me of 3-year-olds and say, I don't know what happened. The twos were not terrible. They're okay. But now all of a sudden they're 3 and they're monsters and they're mean. And I say, just wait till they turn 4. It's all going to go away. What happens, I see with kids when they're 2, they're still very, very dependent on their caregiver. Their language may not be fully developed. So they're still struggling along and they're very, very dependent. And there may be a lot of separation anxiety. And then once they turn 3, they start to get a bigger vocabulary. They start to realize that they are a little human being with opinions and can make choices and have ideas. And they start to press buttons a little bit more and realize that, hey, I can be a little independent. And then just when parents are really beside themselves, the child turns 4 and they start to realize, oh my gosh, like I'm out there a little too much. And they get separation anxiety again, and they want to be with mommy and daddy. And it's like this kind of revolving thing. So I would say I get the most calls from parents of 3-year-olds that just need strategies to really navigate through that year, which can be tough behaviorally and just socially and emotionally. It's a tough year.
Okay, yeah, definitely strategies will be helpful. I know I speak with many people who talk about the threes also. They say that they used to say, terrible twos, but it's more like 3, they say 2, but it could happen as early as 2. But I also see parents like they will talk about the teenage year. So it's kind of like the threes are kind of vanish. And I mean, it could be so far off that now that you're going through a new stage, you're like, this is terrible. So like you have teens versus the threes. I'm not sure which one will be worse, but at least with a teen, you can communicate and they're able to reason with you to a degree. And then we get into Like, at 3 years, they are still learning. They might not fully understand concepts, emotions yet. And we might have a very old school type of thinking where, as you said early on, where your stepmom or your mother would say, you need to discipline your child more, or something along those lines. Yet some parents don't believe in hitting their kids and saying, this is a punishment. Or some parents don't even believe in time out. So, like, there's different parenting styles that a parent would choose. What would you say is the most effective type of parent there is right now?
So I think it's being an adaptive parent, being a parent that will adapt your parenting style to the situation and the child. Because not every style will work for every child and not everything works for every situation. So, for some things, I say you need to be a really authoritative parent. If you have a child that is, say, running across the street and not holding your hand and or doing things that are really unsafe, I say that's the time to be an authoritative parent and say, no, I'm putting my foot down. You're holding my hand when we cross the street. This is not safe. Or no, you can't. When we're eating dinner, we're not going to be walking around the table, eating and chewing and dancing around because you could choke on your food. Like, that's not, it's a no, it's a hard no. And then I say, in some respects, sometimes you have to be a more permissive parent. So, parents that are maybe going through a divorce and you have a child that's really struggling. And normally you say, no more time on your iPad or, no more computer time or tech time. Maybe you need to, like, if they're having a hard day and, they're just adjusting to, say, being at mom's now, being at dad's now, maybe give a little bit of leeway, maybe don't be so authoritative because they're going through something and they need a little downtime and a little more leeway than you normally would do. I'm not saying that forever you let them have an hour of tech if it's only supposed to be 30 minutes or 15 minutes, but read your room, I say, and see what's kind of happening. And, I always say choose your battles because sometimes it's just not worth getting into a tug of war over something that is really not going to affect a child later in life. I was just talking to someone yesterday and I said that I saw a mom walking her son to school in an alligator costume. It was not Halloween and it was really hot out. And I just said, that's a mom that chose her battles because who cares, He's going to get to school and peer pressure alone will take care of him getting out of the alligator costume. Like, don't worry about that. But he's not going to run across the street without you because that's a hard no.
Yeah, no, it's very true. The peer pressure, though, aspect, I mean, we can even go into the fact that when they start to go to school, it can even start as young as preschool, they start to learn from each other, where they're like, oh, they're doing this. Some play really nice, some don't play really nice. So you got to teach them how to play, teach them how to be nice, things along those lines. But then bad habits can form also. So they see them maybe spitting, where they're like, oh, they're spitting. So why can't I do it? Where that's going to be a whole conversation that needs to happen. Is there a way to, since we can't like pick the classrooms that our children are going in, is there a way to help the children move through the dynamic of different children growing up, different individuals? It's like, since they can do it, it doesn't mean you can do it because there's a different mom or dad that says it's okay for them, but I say it's not okay for you. And then it's a whole battle because in their mind, it's like they're three, I'm three, or I'm four, and they can do it, but I can't. Why is it like that? And I'm sure they're going through a lot of confusion because they're learning from their peers. As you said, with the peer pressure with the alligator outfit, it might seem like, okay, now I'm going to be like everyone else. But when they try to be like someone else and they do what other children are doing, then the parent kind of comes in or guardian figure and they say, you're not supposed to do this. So it's a bit confusing for children.
You're right. It is really hard. And I think you have to set out when you first become a parent and kind of decide what is your value system? What do you value? What behaviors do you tolerate and what behaviors do you not tolerate? What behaviors do you think are the behaviors of a good, kind kid? And what behaviors do you think are not? And I think it's important to constantly just reinforce that with your kids, not only when something is happening in the classroom, but all along. Hopefully, if they encounter that kind of behavior in their classroom, like spitting, they're going to already know that that's not something mom and dad would want me to do because we've talked about those things. We've talked about being polite and keeping into your own space. I think it's also important that when you choose a preschool, that you voice to the teachers, what you value and what behaviors you don't want your child to do, and to let you know if my child starts mimicking the bad behaviors of another child, I want to know right away. It's important to nip it in the bud and not let it go. And also find out, how do they deal with behavior? Because I always feel that dealing from behavior from a positive way is better than from a negative way. So I don't think timeout really works. I think if a child gives themselves a timeout, that works. So if there's a child that maybe has ADHD or they're fidgety or they're tired and they know that they can remove themselves and say circle time for a few minutes and go in the corner and use like a little basket of some toys and calm down and then come back when they feel ready, that works because they're given control. But putting a child in the corner has the opposite effect, because most times kids are acting out because they want attention. They don't care if it's good attention or bad attention. If you can catch them being good instead of focusing on the behaviors that you don't like, eventually they're going to learn that, wow, the teacher gives me a lot more attention when I'm following directions, or my parents give me a lot more fun, and there's, things are much better when I'm following the rules of the house. I think that's one way around it for sure.
Yeah. And children don't care if it's positive or negative most of the time, as long as they're getting paid attention to. I remember I
Exactly.
had one student, this is when I first started teaching. I think he was in, I want to say either second or third grade when I had started the year, and he was a handful. His mom was working, single mom, and he was being raised by his grandmother. She was doing the best she could, but he was kind of just running rampant. There was no discipline, no structure for him. And like when he would come into the classroom, I mean, he was under chairs, he was climbing, he was jumping, he was doing unsafe things. And like this is like my first year as teaching. So I was struggling with this one individual child because I'm like, what do you do with someone who doesn't want to learn or be a part of the classroom? It was just like, I'm a rebel. I don't want to be a part of anything that the class is doing. He was the only one. And he wasn't special ed or anything. He was just, he had a discipline problem.
Yeah.
And it was a struggle the first year. The second year was kind of better. And then like the next year, he basically came to me. He goes, I'm a changed man. And I was like, I wish you would have changed, 2 years ago. It would have been a lot easier. But we have different situations for every different child. And one of the things I hear or I heard when I was a teacher in the teacher's room, stuff like that, is they will label a child bad. This is a
Yes, the
bad
dreaded
child.
teacher's room.
Yeah. Like this guy just evil, he's not going to be anything in life. And even if the teacher doesn't directly say that to that child, I am 100% positive their actions are going to be indicative to that type of mindset they're giving themselves to that child. So they're going to say this child's not going to be anything. So they're going to pass them along in grades. They're going to, maybe not give them the attention that they are vying for because it's negative or something. They don't want to deal with it. And they know in their, heart of heart, whatever this child does by the end of the year, they're not my problem. Sometimes teachers give up, and parents also give themselves a mindset. It has changed since the pandemic, is that they would send their kids to school and they would hope that their kids are going to get the best education. But then if you have a, individual, the student is not, like the most upstanding citizen in the classroom, it makes it difficult for the teacher to say, I'm going to give it my all to make sure that your child is getting the best education possible. Even if in the beginning of the year, you talk to them, you say, yeah, everything is going to be good. This is what we're learning. Here's the curriculum. And everything seems good. But then it's kind of like by the end of the year, they're watching more videos than, getting instruction and learning. what can we do to help parents start to take in the role of education also so they can work side by side with the teachers rather than saying school is for learning and education, and when you come home, it's whatever time.
Right. Yeah, I think it's really important that parents form a partnership with their teacher and their school. And it's hard. I mean, like you said, the mom of that one child was a single mom. She was probably working a million hours. The grandma was doing the best that she could, but he probably wasn't getting a lot of one-on-one time when he went home and he was seeking that attention. It's hard to say do this or do that because that's a situation where they're probably struggling to find 5 minutes where they could just get up the energy to make dinner, even perhaps. But I think that if you can ask the school, say, look, I'm struggling, but I do want to have some sort of connection. I do want to do something with my child at home to show there's a homeschool connection. Ask the teacher, what can I do? Can I get a workbook? Can I do, one page a night for 5 minutes? Or just read to your child. You don't have to do formal workbooks or worksheets or homework. Just read together because that's quality learning time. And it's a good time to choose books that maybe focus on issues that you think the child might be struggling with. And then that opens up discussion. And that's good quality time.
That's actually a great recommendation is to read them books that they might be struggling with something. So if they're struggling with being kind, you get a book that's about being kind. If they're maybe a bully, and I hope that's not the case, but you get a book about bullying and you can see how the kid is sad. So then they can see it. It could be any type of thing. And there's so many wonderful books out there. And I encourage parents to go to like Barnes and Nobles or go to your local library. I just checked my local library the other day because my sister had sent me a picture of her daughter in the library. They had a whole event, it seemed like. There was story time, there was play, blocks, and everything. And many parents don't even know that there's so many resources that your town, that your city has to offer you. And just doing a little bit of investigative work, I called them because I went to the website and it was so confusing. And I mean, I'm tech savvy to a degree. And I was like, where in the world am I going to find this kid area? So I called the library and it was probably a woman who was, I think, like probably in her 50s, it seemed like. And she was like, oh, yeah, it's easy. And I'm like, man, like I'm getting showed up. But the reality is, we have resources that we can utilize that many of us don't even know are there. So when a parent is going through struggling, their kid is not behaving, maybe they're a single child. I know sometimes this happens quite a bit when there's just one child, or if a parent has a long window between children. So like if a children, or so if they have their first child and they're 5, and then they have the next child, it's like that big gap right there has to be learned from that child. Like 5 years, they were, doing their thing, and like mom and dad was giving me all this attention. And now all of a sudden, now it's being split. Versus if the child was maybe 1 or 2 around there, it's like, oh, wait, I'm growing up and I'm sharing the attention. And one of the things that I want to talk to you about is there was an interview with Jordan Peterson. He had talked about this idea and this concept about how we have to do the same things with our children. So if you pick up one kid, you have to pick up the other one so they don't kind of get this in their head like, oh, you care more about my brother or my sister. And I found that to be interesting, to say the least, because it's like, if you do that, in a sense, you don't teach them adversity because you're not going to get everything. So, for example, if a
Right.
team wins soccer or something, guess what? There's going to be a loser, but they do have teams and stuff like that where there's no points and everyone's a winner. And even that, like parents don't even like that. Like I've interviewed many, coaches and parents who say, that's not going to happen in my house. There's no participation trophies. There's no participation ribbons and things along those lines because they don't understand adversity. What is your take on adversity from, working in your window all the way up to 8 years old? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it necessary?
I really think kids only learn or they learn the most during adverse situations. They learn how to be good sports. They learn how to deal with failure. and they learn how to pick themselves up and brush themselves off and start again and try again. And life, it's not always about, you're not always going to win. Everything's not always going to go your way. You're not always going to have everyone like you. You're not always going to have the best grade in the class. You're not always going to win every game. And I think it's important. It's just as important to, be good at something and be a winner as it is to learn how to be a graceful loser. And I think get great lessons. It's great if they can win some too, because that's a great feeling and you want them to feel good about themselves. But also, how do I act when when I don't win? Good sportsmanship. Good job, everybody. When they shake hands with the soccer teams and they shake hands and they're like, it was a great game. It was still fun. We had a great time. I think that's really important to teach kids. And I don't think participation trophies do anything to help a child unless the participation trophy is for, we had 10 games and we absolutely need every single person to show up for all 10 games or we're disqualified. If it's an award for that attendance, then that's great. If it's for that. But if it's for you came to 3 games, you didn't play really hard, you didn't give it your all, but you're still going to get a trophy because you paid to go to the dinner, I don't care for that approach.
There's a concept about children in play where they're supposed to get about, I think it's like 2 hours of uninterrupted play per day. And we, as parents, we're busy. And then schools, they have their own curriculum and things along those lines. Recess is what, 24, 25 minutes. And they might get PE once a week, sometimes twice a week, depending on the rotation in the class. You're only getting maybe at most 2 to 3 hours of physical activity in school per week. Now, of course, that's not to say that they're not going to go home and play. Here in Texas, for example, it's very hot. They are going to come home. They're going to say, oh, I had such a rough day at school. Someone said something about me, or I got to do homework. And before you know it, they're so wiped out, mentally drained, that they just want to be in the iPad, watch some cartoons, TV. And we can see the childhood that we grew up in being very different than the childhood that our children are growing up in. And we have to ask ourselves, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Would you say that children growing up today with technology have, I guess you could say, new world problems that they have to address versus ourselves while we were growing up? Because I remember growing up being out on the streets and going riding my bike and like my grandmother yelling at me to come inside and eat. And I'm just out, hanging out with my friends, catching fireflies. And I mean, it was a different life. It's a different world to seem like. But now it's like everything is iPad, technology, TV. There's just so many things that can distract us from going outside. But then if you give them the option to go outside or have an iPad, typically they will go outside, especially if they're younger. But as they grow, they become more dependent on that technology. And it could be because there's a social aspect to it where I need to be connected to my friends. So I need to talk to them on like a chat room or something. Like, I'm not sure what they're using today, but they are using it as a tool to, I guess you can say, replace in-person meetings and greetings.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think kids today are really missing out. I think that they are in this immediate gratification kind of world where if they don't get the answer right away, they're upset about it. If they're not constantly stimulated, it's hard for them. Going outside and trying to gather a bunch of people to have a game of kickball like I used to do, like never happens. I used to go out with a stick and that was like, what we're going to make this stick be something, like we're going to have a fake campfire. We're going to pretend we're fishing and we're going to go on an adventure. And I think I feel very sad for our kids now because one, they hide behind these screens that give them that instant gratification, but also there's so much, and not so much with little kids, but as they get into a little bit older and they start, if parents let them get on these Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, they start to feel, especially if they're bullied in school. If you were bullied in school in the 70s, when you went home, you could escape it for a while and regroup and kind of figure out your strategy for how you're going to handle school the next day. Now there's no escape. These kids are bombarded constantly with nasty text messages and terrible posts about them on Instagram and TikTok. And I think it's really sad. And, I wish, I kind of grieve for our children not having the kind of freedom and imaginary play experiences that we had, because I think they were wonderful.
Yeah, we can all buy farms and go live on the farms and have a bunch of kids and have them all grow
Yeah.
up with each other. It would definitely fix a lot of things, but we are living in a world and there's going to be many struggles and challenges that parents are going to have to navigate. And I do want to reiterate that there's always going to be help. There's always going to be someone like yourself, Danielle, who's going to be helping parents go through the process, look at the modern day world that children are growing up in, and then developing strategies that are going to be beneficial for the parent and the child. And that's so important to understand that there's help just around the corner. So as we begin to wrap up, I would love to get some final words from you and then for you to tell the audience where they can find you.
Sure. I think the most important thing is to remember that just because you've had a child, it doesn't mean that the next day you're going to have every answer to parenting, that you're going to be perfect, that you're going to know the answer for everything. I always hear, oh, as soon as you have the baby, you'll know everything. And it's just not true. You don't know everything. And you grow up with your child. You grow up together. You learn together. And it's okay to say, I don't know how to handle this. It's totally okay. Because if you've been there, so have a million other parents. That's totally fine. I also say don't Instagram yourself. Don't compare yourself to other perfect families on Instagram, because they're not perfect. They're not showing you the dirt diaper at Disney. They're taking the picture after or before before everyone's like, crying and screaming. And just compare yourself and to your family and to your values and what's important to you. If you want to find out more about my coaching, you can find me at my website, which is daniellelinder.com, DANIELLE.Lindner, LINDNER.com. And you can also get my book, which is Parents' Pocket Guide to Surviving the Preschool Years, on Amazon or Barnes & Noble.
All right. And I'll make it easy for everyone. You don't have to worry about the spelling. Just click the link in the description box below. I just find this so much easier. Before, they had to keep rewinding as a D. Okay, A. So just click the link. You'll get straight to her website. You'll get her book, and you'll just learn what needs to be done. And if you are struggling, just again, you're not alone. We can look at the picture perfect, as you said, the Instagram type of thing where everything is perfect. There's filters and everyone's smiling, but you didn't see the tantrum before. You didn't see the fight. You might not see the gray hairs because they just dyed their hair. So there's going to be an experience that you have to go through as a parent. And I always say that you should cherish it, because when they're little babies, you love them and they're cuddly and they're always sleeping. And like, this is pretty easy. And then they start walking. You're like, oh my God, I have to childproof my house. And then you're like, okay, great. Now they're going off to school. And then you can see that they grow up so quickly. And before you know it, they're going to be 18, going off to college. And you're going to look back at those pictures when they're babies and you're going to wish for those moments. So cherish these moments, the good, the bad, everything in between. And you're going to find that if you need help and support, if you're struggling, it's right there. And then later on in life, you're going to say, I made it through, number one, but then number two, I'm glad I did it. So I want to thank you so much, Danielle, for coming on, spending some time and just talking about your work. All right, everyone. I'd like to thank you so much for tuning in to that interview with Danielle and myself. What went on is we talked about parenting. We talked about all the different nuances, parenting styles. And I'm not sure if you are a new listener or not, right? But if you are a new listener, I wrote a blog months ago now about parenting styles. And I would say, oh man, maybe at the beginning of the year of 2024, around there, maybe even 2023. Like, I write so many blogs, I kind of lose track. You can definitely check out that it has all the different types of parenting styles. Being an adaptive parent, right? Being flexible. It can't be rigid. Now, sometimes there's like, you have to pick and choose your battles. Sometimes you're like, well, I'm going to put my foot down. And the more you put your foot down and the more you become immovable, in a sense, it's a pro and a con, right? Number one, they're going to say, oh, mom and dad don't mess around. Let me not fool around. So then you're going to have a nice, easy life. But then they're also going to know that since you're immovable, when it comes to a situation or a scenario that's very similar that they need help in, they're not going to go to you because they're going to know that, mom and dad, they're not going to go for this. And I'm not saying that you have to be their friend and do not be their friend, right? You are their parent. You are their guardian figure. You can be their support. Maybe later on in life, you can be their friend. But to be honest, I mean, in my opinion, right, there is no benefit to being their friend. They can get their own friends. You are their parents. You are their role model. You are that structure. You're that support for them. And they need to understand it. Of course, they're going to test the waters. Of course, they're going to kind of wave in life. So they might be super sweet and then they're a rebel and then they're super sweet again. This is just the stages of life and how children develop. If you have a different situation and you're not equipped for it, you need to figure out as soon as possible how to navigate through it. Because I know parents who have children who are going to be, working in special ed, they have ADHD or ADD or whatever it is, and they have these behavioral issues. And what I have found working and being a teacher and working in special ed is when you label a child and you say that you have a problem, now that becomes their identity. And if you give a child an identity, whether it be willing or unwilling, like unwillingly known to you, you will create issues for yourself as a parent. Maybe you have multiple children, right? Why can't you be more like your sister? Why can't you be more like your brother? Why can't you be more like your friend at school? Or why can't you be more like, your cousin or your, whatever it be, right? You compare them. And now in their eyes, in their mind, it's not only like they have to mimic that person, it's that you don't accept them for who they are. I know you might not have meant that. The things that we say sometimes can be unloving as parents. And it's not our job to love them every single second. Like, I need to be loving and caring and I need to make sure I don't hurt their feelings. Heck, hurt their feelings. Heck, let them cry. Let them go through it. If they're going through heavy emotions and things like that, you wait until they're ready. You're not going to try to conversate with them and talk to them if they're having a tantrum, yelling and screaming, and every single time you talk, they get louder. The only thing I would do in a situation like that is let me know when you're ready. That's what I was saying. I was like, just let me know when you're ready. So I'm trying to have a conversation with you. And this is just my style. It has worked for me for multiple different personalities and children. It might not work for you. You might say, well, come here. Let me give you a hug. Tell me what's wrong. My mom would do that. It worked. We have different parenting techniques and styles, and you have to figure out what works for you. Think of it as your job, right? You might be a lawyer. You might be a doctor. You might be someone in showbiz, right? And if you had to work a different career, you would have to learn that whole career over. You would have to maybe create a different persona, different identity in your mind, different mindset, depending on the job, right? Because there's certain jobs and careers that you have to be a go-getter. For example, a lawyer. You have to be a go-getter, right? You have to be fierce in a certain degree, in a sense, versus if you were, let's say, a pediatrician, right? A pediatrician is going to be someone who's very loving, caring. You don't have to be so fierce, right? You're dealing with children. You are understanding, empathetic. Guess what? This is all good things. So there's different personalities for different situations. And you might have given yourself a different personality, whether because of your situation, because of your career. Understand that you can intertwine it and interweave it in your parenting styles. But at the end of the day, you get to decide what type of child you would like to raise. In a sense, they are like a blank canvas. You are helping them become that masterpiece that we know that they can become. Sometimes there can be a blop or a little error, mistake that is made in life, right? Something happens. But I remember Bob Ross. If you don't remember Bob Ross, he was an artist. He had a show and he would just paint on his show for about 30 minutes or something like that. And it was so wholesome. He said there is no mistake in art. There's just happy little accidents. Not saying that the accidents happen in our children's life and, as a parent is something that we should say, oh, well, we should welcome these accidents, but it is life. It's the yin and the yang of parenting, right? We have the good, we have the bad, we have the moments when we feel overwhelmed We feel tired, but we get through. We somehow make it. And this is something that you don't even have to do by yourself. Join a parenting group. Look for local parents in your neighborhood. I can't tell you how many local parents in my neighborhood who are looking for children to play with, to interact with, to have play dates with. I mean, this is a commodity. Children love to play with other children, but yet we live in a different world and a different society. It's very easy for us to say, well, we can stay inside the house. Everything is in the house, right? You have your food, you have your safety, you have your toys. There's a lot of things that are there. It's comfort. But let's get out of the comfort for a minute. We're going to go to those hot soccer fields and those football stadiums and play baseball with them in the scorching sun. And I'm talking about Texas, but we learn that it's not always going to be comfort. It's not always going to be easy. Everything is not going to be according to plan. We make the best of what we have. If you are stuck in this mindset of perfection, then that's when you're going to want to reach out to a coach, someone who's going to be able to help you, guide you through the parenting process. It is going to be diverse because, again, there's so many different personalities from the parent side all the way to the child side. And you have to figure out what is going to be the best mix for you. And again, the masterpiece that you're trying to raise or create. There's so much that happens in our life. I would say the proudest moments of a person or a parent's life especially is going to be their children. So be happy about your boy, be happy about your girl. Cherish those moments, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between. Maybe one day you are a grandparent and you're going to fix all of the things that you did wrong. And I say wrong in quotations because I remember my dad, I was talking to him and he was like, growing up, we made a lot of mistakes. And I thought I came out great, or my family came out great. And if I look back, I can see all the issues, right? Where we grew up and the scenarios that we were given. I still had a powerful, strong, positive mindset that came from the values that was instilled on me. So understand your values, understand what type of character you're presenting to them, and begin to be that role model. Even if it's working on yourself a day at a time, just get a little bit better. From there, you're going to see that parenting becomes a lot easier. And I'm not saying you need to know everything from day one, but if you continually make progress toward you being better, they become better as a counter result. So if you as a parent are struggling, and not only with your child, but just in life general, I encourage you to share this video or audio, this episode, with anyone who's a parent, maybe someone who's struggling, or maybe even someone who you think can do better as a parent. Because again, opinions can come in and you can say that you're parent of the year, but at the same time, every child is going to be different. They're going to require a different finesse, a different type of parenting. Just because your parenting is effective for you, or maybe for that job, for the moment that you are going to be interacting with them, it doesn't mean it's going to work long term. This is going to be a good opportunity for you to give someone help without saying that they're doing something wrong. Parenting does not have to be rocket science, but sometimes we make it so. My name is Michael Rearden. I'm a mindset coach. If you have any questions, email me coachinginsession@gmail.com, and I'll see everyone on the next episode of Coaching in Session. Until then, everyone take care.